lies a molten in the grave, his soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. The stars above in heaven now are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven now are looking kindly down. The stars above in heaven now are looking kindly down on the grave of old John Brown. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul goes marching on.
Hello, everybody. We are back. Another YouTube live stream. I told you I'd be back. I told you it wasn't just a one-off. We're back. No more once a month streams. It's gonna be hopefully at least once a week. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today, though. Hopefully, that glare goes away. I need to put up some blackout curtains or something in my room. Because the light is kind of ridiculous, but what's up, everybody? You mean the Soviets killed 10% of Afghanistan? Are you just going to talk about that, or how they were pulled into a war? We're going to talk about a lot of stuff. We're going to debunk Armchair Historian's video about Afghanistan and the Soviet invasion, because there's a lot of interesting context that he leaves out, unsurprisingly. He's not the worst of these
Discussions needed on underrated socialist experiments like Mongolia, Yemen, Mozambique, etc.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be something good to talk about. Nobody knows about Mongolia. Or Yemen. Yemen's another really interesting one. I actually got the chance to speak with someone a long time ago who grew up under the communist government in Yemen. He was like, yeah, they taught me how to read. They were great. It's sad what happened. And there was like I believe it was North Yemen had the communist government and South Yemen had like a nationalist left-wing government. And there were like plans to unite until you know who screwed it all up. Yeah. Thank you very much for the 100, what is that, like a rupee or something? Thank you very much for the super chat, Sumya. It's a great way to start ourselves off today. What's good? Oh, and then I got interrupted, but Balthasar said, you mean the 10% killed by U.S. proxies? Nice try, Mossad. You ain't wrong, brother. ACP and this Beatrice. Absolutely. We are here, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, you guys. A lot of stuff to talk about. First of all, let's just start out with news and politics, shall we? So there's a lot going on economically right now. There's a lot going on with the U.S.-dominated system of super imperialism. Many things happening. But one of the things that we haven't really talked about much is that the U.S. trade war with Canada is heating up. Obviously, Trump talked about annexing or invading Canada, which is kind of crazy. I mean, maybe it would be a good thing if the U.S. and Canada could unite. That's what we want to do with the ACP, is eventually unite the two. Because the only reason Canada became a separate country was because they remained under the control of the British after the American Revolution. But obviously, Trump's threats to invade have more to do with imperialist interests and resource interests and things like that, rather than just uniting the people into one sovereign socialist bloc. But this is a pretty interesting article that explains what's been going on. Since Trump has returned to office, the United States and Canada have repeatedly come close to an all-out trade war, only for Trump to dial back some of his harshest attacks against one of America's closest allies. And the reason that Trump is dialing back his attacks is because this trade war against Canada threatens to seriously hamper the U.S. economy. And we'll talk about why today. But that period of relative calm came to an end on Saturday as new 50% tariffs from Washington took effect, drawing a pointed threat from Canada to respond in kind. The resulting clash left the two North American neighbors barreling towards a dangerous tit-for-tat escalation, one that may inflict real harm on the U.S. economy. For Trump, the return to trade brinksmanship reaffirmed an old-time truth, as tariffs are taxes on imports, meaning some of the costs of his latest duties may ultimately fall hardest on U.S. importers stung by years of persistently high prices. So this is the thing right here. Under the system of super imperialism that we currently have, the U.S. is running a massive trade deficit, meaning we import way more than we export. And we've actually outsourced a lot of our own production and manufacturing and become highly, highly reliant on imports. And as a result, production in the U.S. has also become more expensive. So a couple things happen if you put tariffs on imports. It doesn't work like it did, during America's industrialization period years ago, over 100 years ago. What happens is imports become more expensive, so imports that are involved in U.S. domestic production become more expensive, which ultimately relays itself into the price of goods. So if it costs more to produce a product here in the U.S., because the imports needed to produce that product increase in price, then ultimately the American consumers feel that. We're going to have to pay more. Also, the goal of this is to make, Trump's stated goal is to make the U.S. less dependent on imports and spur domestic production. But domestic production in the U.S. is more expensive than importing a lot of these goods from foreign countries. So it basically forces the price up. It forces people to buy more expensive domestic goods rather than imported goods. So tariffs could be useful if paired with like an industrialization policy, like a national jobs program, or a real investment in the expansion of American manufacturing and American industry. But of course, that's not what we're seeing. Trump is just blindly throwing tariffs on random countries that piss him off or whatever and saying this is going to bring back American jobs. But in reality, all it's doing is making things more expensive for American consumers and American manufacturers. If Canada retaliates, Mr. Trump does the same, the result could spiral. Uncertainty, volatility, exactly. Could weigh heavy on businesses who are reliant on Canadian imports. And the U.S. plans to go forward with this. Well, Mr. Carney, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, has not backed down at all. In fact, saying that Canada is at war with the U.S. now. Let me see if there's anything else I thought was interesting in this particular article. Oh, yeah, this was interesting. A retaliatory cycle could complicate the nation's existing battle with inflation, which remains well above the 2% target that the Federal Reserve aims for, despite Mr. Trump's arguments to the contrary. In fact, rising prices prompted the president just this week to relax his tariffs on beef imports, a tacit acknowledgement that his trade policies had hit American wallets. And Trump's approval ratings are in the dirt right now because people are feeling his policies in their wallets. Increasingly, those economic anxieties have also spilled into financial markets. This is interesting. Concerns about America's mounting debt load, which hit 40 trillion this week, helped send yields on government bonds soaring. The war with Iran has also posed economic challenges, crimping growth globally while causing fuel costs to rise. So, bond yields increasing is super important because, as we talked about in the last stream, the sale of U.S. bonds and U.S. securities to foreign countries, which is basically the U.S. saying, loan us some money now and we'll pay you back later, that is vital to the U.S. empire because more so than taxes on the American people, that's how the U.S. funds its military presence abroad. We sell Canada and Japan and European countries these securities, these bonds. So we get money from them. And the way that they make a lot of this money, which also relates to this story, is by exporting goods to the U.S., right? So we buy their goods and send them U.S. dollars. They accumulate U.S. dollars and then invest those U.S. dollars in American financial assets. So the tariffs are also kind of putting a block on that system of super imperialism by preventing these countries from accumulating as many US dollars as they would have otherwise. So then they invest those USD in American bonds, basically IOUs, where the US says we'll pay you back later. And if those bond yields go up, which they have been recently, that's more money that the US has to pay back to these countries. And it has to pay back to its foreign creditors, which is a very interesting thing because usually, historically, the creditor country, the country that loans all of this money and traps others in debt, is the dominant imperialist superpower. But today, the U.S. is actually using its debtor status to remain the dominant imperialist superpower. We're borrowing money from all these countries who import goods here, and then using that money to fund our military apparatus. But the more that those yields go up, the more the U.S. has to pay back, and the more problems that creates for the system of super imperialism. So really, I mean, the accelerationist argument here is proving to be largely correct, that Trump is sort of accelerating the downfall of the U.S. empire through his trade war, through his war with Iran, and various other financial policies that his administration is engaged in. So another article here, I should have pulled this up right away. Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, interestingly, I think if this was Trudeau, he probably would have just backed down right away. And maybe this is why Canadians were more favorable towards Carney. Trudeau's off dating Katy Perry now, living his best life, honestly. But he said, we are being attacked by Trump, and we are now at war with the U.S. So really strong language from Mark Carney here. The morning after he pulled negotiators from trade talks in Washington and set off a new round of American tariffs, Prime Minister Mark Carney called the U.S. proposal a bad deal and said Canada was at war with the United States. We've recognized from the start that America has changed. The American empire has changed. And Canada is very important to the American empire's place in the world. So him saying that, America has changed is substantial. We recognize sometimes that signature is written in pencil. So they'll agree to one thing and do another, of course. We cannot accept what they offered, and we will not give what they asked. We are not prepared to compromise Canada's sovereignty to undermine our key industries. Which, in some ways, the Trump administration is trying to undermine their sovereignty, but also the status quo, the system as it is today, where Canada imports goods to the United States, accumulates U.S. dollars, and then purchases American financial assets and bonds and treasury securities, is already undermining Canadian sovereignty. That's what makes Canada basically just a cuck, a junior partner, a puppet of the United States, is their sort of baked-in role to this global financial system that operates with the United States at the center. So he's basically saying you're undermining our sovereignty by not allowing us to continue importing goods to your country, accumulating U.S. dollars, and then using those U.S. dollars to buy American assets, which the United States then uses to fund their military presence abroad. So in some ways, I guess they're trying to undermine Canadian sovereignty, but it's not like Canada has ever had sovereignty, right? Because they're so dependent on the United States and this system that Michael Hudson calls super imperialism, they basically have no sovereignty. You're at war when you're attacked, and we got attacked. The latest U.S. tariffs are designed to hurt and divide us. They are a miscalculation because Canadians always take care of each other. We know we are stronger together. Blah, blah, blah. I don't know what the point of Trump's tariffs are. Maybe they are to divide Canadians or to weaken Canada. I think his ultimate goal is to bring production back to the U.S., but this is just not going to cut it. You need tariffs combined with a massive, jobs program, a massive investment in industry and manufacturing. Oh, yeah, and then one more thing. Carney said that Canada would retaliate dollar for dollar. Americans are asking too much. And he said that in response, he might put tariffs, here it is, on American agricultural products. Or maybe that's not where it is. They said aluminum and tech sector and steel sector, but most importantly, he said he may put tariffs on American agricultural products, which the one thing that the U.S. still does export is agricultural products. And again, this is part of the global system of super imperialism. Maybe this stuff is a little boring to you guys, but it's freaking interesting to me. Basically, the IMF and the World Bank have systematically prevented other countries from developing agricultural self-sufficiency. And this does two things. It provides U.S. farmers with an endless foreign market for their exports, right? So, or for their surplus. So everything that they can't sell in America, they're able to sell on foreign markets abroad. This is why China tariffing U.S. soybean production was so devastating to the U.S. because American farmers are reliant on foreign markets for their goods. But this also has a political effect then, where foreign countries are completely dependent on the U.S. for food. They're not able to develop their own tractors and, advance their own agriculture or modernize their own agriculture, I should say. So they're dependent on the U.S. for these agricultural exports. And this started way back under FDR. So Canada's taking a page out of China's book now and threatening to tariff U.S. agricultural exports, which would really hamper the United States economy, and more importantly, it would anger farmers and turn farmers against Trump when his approval ratings are already in the toilet. So interesting that Canada is not backing down and that they're threatening U.S. agricultural exports. And something... This is kind of off topic, but fascinating. U.S. This U.S. system of preventing other countries from developing agricultural self-sufficiency also led to the American government and the IMF and the World Bank and the UN promoting birth control globally. So you know how the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or whatever it's called now after their divorce, is all up in Africa pushing birth control on them, pushing contraceptives on them. This isn't because they're benevolent and they're liberals who believe everyone has a human right to birth control. No, it's because they told these countries, we're not going to help you produce more food. We're not going to help you establish agricultural self-sufficiency and the ability to feed your people. So we need you to keep the population down so you have less mouths to feed. And this began in the 70s. And that's when they started heavily funding and pushing contraceptives on Africa and other countries in the global south. Because rather than produce more food, they wanted them to just have less babies. So, and that also has been a thing domestically. That's why sections of the ruling class have been so heavily pro-birth control. And that's to say nothing about, birth control, like from a moral perspective or whatever, regardless of whatever your opinions are on that. The reasons why liberal elites push birth control so heavily and try to make it a moral issue is because they want to maintain the system of U.S. imperialism and they have this Malthusian anti-human policy of keeping the population down in other countries so they don't have to help them produce their agriculture or modernize their agricultural systems. What's good, comrades? Carney's a bankster. Perry belongs with someone so foul. He is foul. He is a banker. Big banker. That's why he wants to maintain this system. He's like, the U.S. is undermining our sovereignty by trying to maintain the system where we have no sovereignty. It's that meme when Carney and Trump are going at it, two tards fighting. Yo, Eddie. Yo, what up, comrade Lulu? How you going? How you doing, comrade? Hope you're doing well. When you are freshly single but lost your wingman, LOL. Yo, ACP.
ACP, ACP, ACP.
Thank you, comrade Lulu. I appreciate you. That'll go a long way. I'm going to be streaming more nowadays, not only because I want to get the truth out and want to talk about news and politics with you guys, but also I need to buy a new car. My car shit out on me, and I need a new car as soon as possible. So thank you very much. All your super chats today will go towards the Buying Eddie a Car Fund. Also, we got patreon.com/MidwesternMarks, but thank you. Afghanistan Zindabad. I love Afghanistan. I will sacrifice my life for Afghanistan. Actually, Pakistan and Afghanistan, or Pakistan, which is obviously the video we're referencing with that joke, will be a big part of our story today once we get to the main event about the Afghan war. A car would definitely be nice. It would, wouldn't it? Especially when you live in Iowa and there's zero public transportation. There is a bus system in my town, but it's not a good one. It's not like New York City or anything. I think a part of the problem is that a lot of people overestimate Trump. At some point, we just have to realize he's a demented moron. I think that's part of it. I mean, there's certain decisions behind the scenes that are being made by, like, his advisors. The deep state, financiers and things like that. Like the U.S. Treasury decisions, for example. Let's say the U.S. exchanging a bunch of euros on the currency market in order to stabilize the Japanese yen and ensure that Japanese people continue buying U.S. securities. That's not a Trump decision, right? He doesn't understand how that system works. I'm, 99% sure based on his policy and his speeches in the past. The system that Michael Hudson calls super imperialism, Trump can't really grasp it. That's why he said he was going to eliminate the U.S. debt in 2016. Like, he just has no idea how this stuff works.
Here, bro, go buy a car in Iowa.
Thank you, In
Saluting
It for
face.
Fun. $5 towards the car fund. There are some, like, cars with, like, 200,000 miles on them for, like, $1,000 here in Iowa. Like, super cheap. That's what I'm looking at right now, just to hold me over for a while. So you may not think $7 of super chats goes a long way, but it actually does. Okay, we should have like a little thermometer on the side of the screen that fills up every time you guys super chat. Like here's the Buy Eddie a Car Fund. Thank you very much. I should put my PayPal on the screen too, because YouTube obviously takes your money, but you guys could go to, I think it's just paypal.com/MidwesternMarks, and then you could just donate without having YouTube take any of your money. But anyways, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, Trump. So certain decisions like the global financial decisions, I don't think he's making. But like the war in Iran, of course that was pushed by the Rubios and the Lindsey Grahams and the Laura Loomers and people who surround him. But I think ultimately he made that decision. I don't know about Hegseth, I think Hegseth is just a coward who's kind of along for the ride. But then the trade war stuff, I don't know. It feels like it's all coming from Trump. It feels like it's all coming from him because he's like, I promised protectionism. I promised to bring manufacturing back. I railed against TPP and NAFTA, these liberal free trade deals that were enacted or essentially enacted in the case of TPP, for all intents and purposes, under Clinton and Obama, so I'm going to repeal these. Now I'm going to bring back manufacturing through tariffs. I feel like that's all him. He just doesn't know how to do it. He doesn't realize that in order to actually bring manufacturing back to the U.S., you'd have to invest some of that massive military budget in industry, not just tariff other countries who we're reliant on for imports. We have some public transport here in the city of Cincinnati, so I moved into the city. F buying gas right now. You right. That shit's expensive, brother. My brother sold me his '08 Impala for $500. Wow, that's a deal. Can I have it? Just kidding. Thoughts on reindustrialization via green energy, like how China has been able to do? Much opportunity for the U.S., but we're cut to the oil and gas lobby. I mean, yeah, it's common sense, right? As well as nuclear. Like, this is a part of the ACP program, acp.us, if you want to read our program. Like, not only reindustrializing, but doing it with the most modern, advanced, and ecologically friendly forms of energy possible. Because it literally is just that. Like, we have, like, nuclear is so powerful. China's doing these thorium reactors and nuclear reactors and producing all of this power. While in the U.S., we are just tied to the oil and gas lobby. So not only will they not allow, a lot of renewables, there is becoming more and more investment in solar and hydropower and wind power and things like that. But also there's all this propaganda against nuclear energy. That's what Oliver Stone's recent documentary about Chernobyl was about. Basically how Chernobyl was overinflated by the oil and gas lobby to demonize nuclear, and they basically inserted that event into the American consciousness in order to terrorize people, to instill terror in people, I guess is what I mean, about nuclear energy, even though it's clearly like the way forward. It's clearly like the most efficient and powerful way to produce energy without destroying the planet and the ozone layer.
That a red ACP hat, brother? I just got a my woodland ACP lid. How do we get the red one?
Hell yeah, the merch store should be up within a week or two. I can text Noah right now. Noah's working on getting that up along with Arkansas Worker and some others. But the merch store is like ready to go. We just have to roll it out. I'm pretty sure Christian, our tech guy, already built like the infrastructure to sell merch without having to give a bunch of money to Amazon or whatever. So we just have to roll it out. So all of those should be available soon. I have the Woodland hat as well. It's very sick. Probably my favorite ACP hat and my second favorite piece of ACP gear. My favorite ACP gear is the shirt that says, "If this flag offends you, I'll help you pack." And then it's the hammer and sickle with the American flag. Hard to top that. I love wearing that to the gym. And the conservative TRT dads look at me like, what the fuck? They think I'm like a conservative for 5 seconds, and then they realize I'm a commie. But yeah, thank you, In It for Fun. Appreciate you. Honestly, aren't we already selling the hats, though? I don't know. That's Noah's department. I got to do a stream with Noah soon. He would be able to explain all that to y'all. But yeah. Alright, I'm sorry. I got to go to the bathroom already. I drank too much coffee before this stream. I also had to do like 2 hours of prep for this stream, because the Afghanistan video is going to be lit. Lit. So... One second. What should we pull up here? Here you go. Here's me wrestling a former Olympian when he came out of retirement. I'll be back in like a minute. This is probably the best person I've ever beaten in my life, even though he was old and... kind of out of shape when he came back. He's still really, really freaking good. He's like a multiple time world team member and Olympian. All right, BRB.
Better blue. Tied. Tied. Yep. Yep.
This is actually kind of a boring match. I was nervous because I knew he was really good and I didn't want to get caught, but I do end up winning. We can play the rest of that later, perhaps. My neighbors got the music bumping right now. They were playing Kanye earlier. Only ACP people get hats right now, I believe. Yeah, I think you have to be a member to actually get one right now. I can't wait to actually find out the truth about the Soviet-Afghan War. History classes always call it an invasion. Yeah, and I mean, technically it was in a similar way to how, the Russian involvement in Ukraine is an invasion. Except in that case, you just had the people of the Donbass asking Russia to come in. And with the Soviet Afghan invasion, you had the actual Afghan government asking the Soviets to come in for years. And you'll see Armchair Historian isn't the worst of these YouTube history channels, but he's not great. And a lot of the ways he portrays the conflict is totally wrong. And there's tons and tons of super important context left out. That'll probably enrage you. Eddie, regardless of monarchy as a system, Afghanistan was doing well for a developing country under its last king before his cousin deposed him in 73. Look up the guy real quick. He's interesting. That's true, actually. And the Soviets were involved, like, helping them. The Soviets were, like, helping Afghanistan develop for years and saw them as, like, a relatively stable ally in the region. And then they had a liberal reformer come to power. And the Soviets didn't mind him either that much. And then the communists came to power, and this is when the U.S. and Saudis were really ramped up their funding of the jihadist conservative elements. And not to say that the U.S. created the Mujahideen, right? Those uprisings were largely organic to start. But then it was Saudi and U.S. influence that allowed them to continue gaining steam. Billions and billions of dollars in training and stuff like that. You should re-upload your wrestling matches with dramatic music playing in the background. That's not a bad idea. Uncle Sam sending his moderate rebels, having a decapitation contest, yes. Most YouTube historians are dumb when it comes to Soviet history. It's so infuriating, too. It's like, you don't even have to take the Soviet side. Like, you'll see when I talk about it later today, like, I have criticisms of what the Soviets did. It's not like everything they did was perfect or the situation was awesome for them. But some of the stuff these historians choose to leave out and some of the ways they choose to portray these events are like just such a manipulation. And I don't know if Armchair Historian does it on purpose or if he's just drunk on American sources. Like I remember he did what was supposed to be like a pro-communist perspective on the Vietnam War from the North Vietnamese perspective. And Luna Oi did like a debunk of it because even that was totally filled with propaganda and like, um, you know, did not portray the Viet Minh in a very positive light, even though they were literally defending their country against foreign occupiers who were bombing schools and committing horrific massacres against children. Luna Oi. Oh, somebody already mentioned that. That's hilarious. Emiliano already said Luna Oi had a great video tearing apart Armchair Historian about the Vietnam War. Yes, sir. Do you think the Soviets were wrong for siding with the Tudeh over the Islamic Republic? Okay, I'll move on to the next segment after this. The socialists in Afghanistan ended up killing a king's cousin after he shifted away from the Soviet Union foreign policy. That's interesting. What were we just talking about? I'm sorry, I forgot. Oh, I don't think they were wrong for siding with the Tudeh. I think they were wrong for telling the Tudeh to support balkanization during the Iran crisis. Because they were using this like dogmatic interpretation of Marxism and the national question. And the Iran crisis was where sections of Iran, I can't remember which countries, but they were basically going to balkanize Iran and give pieces of land to other countries or maybe give the Kurds a state or something. And the Soviets said, well, this is the national question. This is national self-determination, so the Tudeh party, you should support this. But it was not widely supported by the Iranian people. The Iranian people wanted Iran to stay together. They didn't want their country to be balkanized, which I agree with that position in hindsight. All that balkanizing a country does is make it weaker and easier for the U.S. to prey upon. We need large civilization states that encompass multiple nationalities. The Tudeh party took orders from Moscow, supported the balkanization of Iran, and this like totally undermined their legitimacy with the Iranian people and like was a death knell for their popularity in the country. And then they were unable, the Tudeh party was unable to do enough to keep Mossadegh in power, even though they mostly supported him. So that's what I think about that. Get Luna on a stream. She won't talk to me because of my hat. There's no way Luna Oi will talk to me. She also like married an anarchist and is like not a Marxist-Leninist anymore, so. Luna would love to hang around the Vietnamese Stalinist, but her six-pack friend doesn't allow it. Ah, you said it, not me. Can't say you're 100% wrong. Alright, so this will be a short story, but Trump's approval ratings are down to like 30 or 35%. Her husband is the problem. It really is. He's never marry an anarchist, folks. So Donald Trump's approval rating is down in every single state after 19 months. Even the states like Mississippi that are like hardcore conservative and will never go blue, his approval rating is down in every single state. And there's only a handful of states, including like in the deep south and stuff, where his approval rating is still in the positives. I've heard some polls as low as 33%, a recent Reuters poll. I've heard 35% is the one that this poll found. But this is the thing, like, you can support his culture war policies all you want, right? You can say, I support Trump because we're allowed to say the R word now, and, you know, he's not doing DEI, and, you know, he has a certain position on trans people in sports or whatever. You can support him for all those reasons, or because you think he's funny and you like his tweets. But as soon as you start feeling it in your pocketbook, As soon as groceries start becoming more expensive, which Walmart has seen its lowest growth since COVID this week, and seen a 9% decrease in the stock market or the value of its stock price. As soon as gas starts going up above $4 or $5 a gallon, especially when this guy promised to end the wars and bring down gas prices, that was a huge part of his campaign. People are going to start turning on you, right? Because really, and this is what every single poll about what people care about politically, this is what every single poll says, and it's a very Marxist thing, is that economics is the real thing that they care about, right? Unless you're like wealthy and you're already doing well, but even then, economics is the thing that's number one, or that's the most important to you. How's the economy doing, right? Because thank you, Corvid Conquest, 21 months as a member. Eddie, you should probably critique Epic History series on China's revolution and modern history. Granted, the full series is over 2 hours, so you may need to split. I can definitely do that, brother. Thank you for being a member and such a long-time supporter. You're the man. As soon as people start feeling it in their pocketbooks, they're going to turn on you because economics is borne out to be the number one issue for the majority of Americans in every single poll, which is, Marx said that in the 1800s. He said ultimately all political issues are downstream from production, from economics. Who gets what? Right? So if the country starts hurting economically, people are going to turn on you. He still has like his cult-like supporters, or his supporters who are holding out hope that he would have been better than Hillary or Biden or Kamala, which I'm not saying they would have been much better. But even a lot of his most hardcore are turning on him now. Nationally, 35% of voters approve of Trump's job performance, while 59% disapprove, leaving him significantly underwater with a net approval of minus 24. And guess what's coming up? The midterms. And Trump's, or I don't know if Trump's even allowed to run in 2028, but the 2028 presidential election. And the Republicans are going to get steamrolled, brother. They're going to get steamrolled. Now, the Republicans are, I guess, lucky because the Democrats are impotent and they have nothing to offer America outside of these like DSA socialist candidates who are trying to do things a little bit differently, which seems to be the direction that the party's going now. Chuck Schumer recently said the Democrats' big tent includes socialists, right? Because they know that Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris and the Hillary Clinton wing of the party have no energy behind them. So that might keep the Republicans alive for a little bit, but they're going to get crushed, which is always how it goes in America, you know. One party gets the majority or gets the presidency, and everyone, then they actually govern. And people are like, wow, these guys suck. I'm going to vote for the other side. And the other side gets in office, and after a few years, it's like, wow, these guys suck too. I'm going to vote for the other side. And it kind of is this pendulum. And what we need ultimately is to sublate that system and get people to realize both sides suck. But all of you in my chat probably already know that. But here's the state-by-state breakdown of Trump's approval. How does this work? The White House has repeatedly dismissed the president's low approval ratings, pointing to his 2024 election victory as the clearest measure of public support. That's hilarious. So the red is where he still got support. 1, 2. So he's got Wyoming, which I don't know if y'all have ever been to Wyoming, but there's like 4 people who live there, and one of them's a tumbleweed. Like when I went to Wyoming, I was shocked because my brother lives in Idaho. So we drove through Wyoming when we were going out to visit him. And I was shocked. I was like, bro, this is the literal like Mojave Desert. There's nothing here. They're like actual tumbleweeds rolling by. I felt like I was in like a movie, a Western. So there's nobody there. And they just kind of hunt and do their own thing. So that barely even counts. North Dakota, Montana's barely hanging on. Idaho's barely hanging on. South Dakota's barely hanging on. North Dakota's support for him still seems pretty strong. This is where all the Native Americans live too, that ultra leftists love to fetishize. Even though a lot of them are like Trump supporters and stuff. And that's not me shitting on Native Americans. I'm just saying ultra leftists are like, you know, we need to kick all the white people out of America and give it back to the natives, as if that's even what the majority of Native Americans are calling for. West Virginia still holding on. In Virginia, he's underwater. In North Carolina, he's underwater. In South Carolina, he's underwater. In Tennessee, he's barely hanging on. Bro, these are like deep South red states. Maybe not deep South, but southeastern red states. His approval rating is negative in Georgia, brother. And Florida. And Texas. And Mississippi. Like, what is going on here? Texas and Mississippi and Louisiana? Like, bro. Trump is cooked. Trump is cooked. That's crazy. That's actually crazy. And people say, you know, Americans' heads are just like stuck in the sand. They're solidified. They're not open to political change or like new ideologies or, you know, they're just set in stone. Like, that's just boomers, bro. That's literally only boomers. The rest of America is like willing to learn and change and grow and wants something new and hates both parties. And I mean, I think this is proof of that. The fact that these deep South states that are often mocked by leftists, you know, and I've been guilty of that in the past myself, doing my Trump supporter voice, you know, but a lot of these people who talk like that are like, F Trump, I'm tired of paying $5 for my gas, and God bless them for it. Okay, join the ACP if you're one of those people. But here are the only states where he's positive: North Dakota, South Dakota, Alabama, Idaho. In Alabama, it's only +6. He's only got a 49% approval rating in Alabama, bro. Arkansas +8, only a 51%. Oklahoma +7, Montana +4. So it looks like everyone in Montana hates him. Where's Wyoming here? Oh, here it is. So even in Wyoming, only 56% approve still, and only 35% disapprove, which, like I said, goes to show a lot of people in Wyoming are like, I don't give a shit. I just want to hunt. I just want to shoot stuff out the window of my car. So, yeah, this relates to what we were talking about before, too, with prices going through the roof due to the trade war and due to the Iran war. Once you lose Alabama's confidence, you failed as a Republican. That's so true, bro. Like, how bad do you gotta mess up to lose Alabama? They were willing to give you the benefit of the doubt on everything. Do you remember, has anyone seen Shane Gillis's bit on Alabama? How they were like the last state to desegregate sports until they like got whomped by, I think it was like LSU or something, because they had black players. And then within a year or two, Alabama was like, all right, we'll let them play. We're losing at football because we don't have enough black people. We'll let them play. And he was like, if you want to get Alabama to accept trans people, you just got to put together a like amazing trans football team. And they'll be like, all right, let them in. I might move to Wyoming if it means I could shoot guns while driving. Bro, that's a real story I heard. My buddy had some friends in Wyoming, and he said they would hunt out of the window of their car, which is highly illegal anywhere, but the fact that Trump was a Democrat tells you everything you need to know about how parasitic and desperate capitalists are. Yeah, true. They don't care. They'll just switch back and forth. Yeah, they would just shoot stuff out of the window of their car and then get out and throw it in the car and keep going. It's like, nobody in Wyoming cares, bro. The speed limit in Wyoming is like 190. You can go as fast as you want. If you go over 200 miles an hour, a cop will pull you over and say, hey, now, slow down, please. You got to be going under 100 if you want to shoot guns out of your car. Trump is a Jewish man from New York City. I can't believe people believed he was a conservative Christian. That's what drives my parents crazy. Because my parents are both, like, really into their faith, their Christian faith. And they're like, how does anyone believe this guy is a genuine Christian? Especially after this video. Like, you gotta be insane. It's how I feel about Nick Fuentes, too. I'm like, does anyone who actually reads the Bible and cares about this stuff and goes to church regularly think this guy is a Christian? He doesn't try to live like Jesus in any way, shape, or form. He's just like a hateful little cockroach. I see a lot of shotgun holes and stop signs in rural places of the Midwest. I've seen that too. What do you think of Russia arresting KPRF deputies? It's a big scandal now. There apparently some flew too close to the sun. Oh, I haven't heard about that. I'll have to look into it. It's too bad, if true. I gotta be careful going back to Russia. Remember this? Someone should ask Nick Fuentes his favorite verse.
Okay. You mentioned the Bible. You've been talking about how it's your favorite book. And you said, I think last night in Iowa, some people are surprised that you say that. I'm wondering what one or two of your most favored Bible verses are and why.
I wouldn't want to get into it because to me that's very personal. You know, when I talk about the Bible, it's very personal. So I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into...
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite?
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
Even to cite a verse that
you
like?
No, I don't want to do that.
You're an Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy?
Probably equal. I think it's just an incredible... The whole Bible is an incredible... I joke very much so. They always hold up The Art of the Deal. I say my second favorite book of all time. But...
The Art of the Deal, my second favorite book of all time. That guy got Christians all over America to vote for him, bro. That's crazy. Someone seriously needs to ask Nick Fuentes what his favorite book of the Bible is. It's just frustrating to me because like my dad would wake up and read his Bible every single morning for years before going to work all day and busting his ass. And then you got people like Nick Fuentes and Trump like LARPing as Christians and using it to gain political followings. It's just like disgusting to me. But I don't get how people don't like see through it. Like, you really think that guy is a Christian? He didn't even care enough to have an example ready. Exactly. Like, bro, say Jesus wept or something. And then to say The Art of the Deal is my second favorite book behind the Bible. Bro, what are we talking about? Trump doesn't want to be exposed like Mike Huckabee did years later, took a Bible verse and changed it to justify Israel. That's hilarious. A lot of people do that. A lot of evangelical Zionists. Alright, one more story, then we'll get into the Soviet-Afghan War. No more stalling. So again, we've been talking today about the decline of the American empire. And I'm not saying the American empire is about to collapse, but it's absolutely declining. Conditions are getting worse and worse here domestically. People are getting more and more angry. Trump's approval rating is in the toilets. There's all sorts of financial and currency problems around the world, which is essential to the U.S. empire. And now the U.S. is reducing joint military exercises with South Korea, which of course the Pentagon and the arms industry are calling a huge mistake, even though it's probably the best thing Trump's done. But what they're actually doing here is drawing down in Asia so that they can send those troops to the Middle East, to Iran. So the U.S., this is just an example that the U.S. empire is completely overextended, and they now need to concentrate resources and bodies in Iran. And another example of this is Ukraine is running low on interceptor missiles, and Zelensky's pissed about it because the U.S. is sending them less weapons because they're focusing them on Iran. And then this week, Russia had its deadliest attack on Ukraine, where Ukraine failed to intercept a single Russian missile. So it just goes to show that the U.S. is overextended and they have a production problem where they can't reproduce weapons as quickly as the United States can. And now it's forcing them to adjust. And as they're doing this, China is expanding their military presence in the South China Sea. So as these U.S. ships and U.S. troops are going out and all these U.S. resources are being recentered on Iran, China is solidifying their control over their own region and their own borders, which is good. I hope they do. And of course, the weapons industry is mad about this, and Europe is mad too, because there's also a U.S. withdrawal from Europe. 80,000 U.S. personnel are in Europe, early moves, including withdrawals from Germany. The review is driven. Trump wants them to take greater responsibility for their own conventional defense. And this is reinforced by frustration over limited European support for U.S.-Israeli operations in Iran. So Trump is saying we're going to pull troops out of Europe and stop. We're going to stop occupying you, which really angers the European politicians. You know, they're like, no, please occupy us. You need to occupy us. We want to be your cucks. The only country more cucked than us is Japan. So anyways, a lot of European countries, though, to their credit, have been very resistant to help the U.S. and Israel wage a war on Iran. So Trump is trying to punish them now by forcing them to pay for their own militaries, which is accelerating European rearmament, which was not supposed to happen at the end of World War II because they wanted to prevent World War III. But yeah, again, it just shows that the U.S. military is truly overextended. And we're not seeing the collapse of the U.S. empire right now, in my opinion, but we're seeing a decline. And we're seeing a lot of the contradictions at the base of the imperialist world system come to a head. And then we covered last week how the USS Abe Lincoln was, the troops there were suffering a huge morale hit. And people were supposedly jumping overboard, and their families were complaining that the conditions were terrible, and they had been stationed there for way too long and all this. So now that has been replaced with the USS George Washington. They replaced the USS Lincoln with the USS George Washington, hilariously. But again, this was a ship that was in the Pacific. Right? This was part of the US's East Asia military presence. And now they're having to draw down that military presence in order to concentrate more focus on Iran. So overextended, running out of munitions, and it goes to show that Iran standing up and being willing to sacrifice everything to maintain their sovereignty is actually dealing a significant blow to the U.S. empire. It really is. Whether we'll witness the end of the U.S. empire in the next decade, I don't know. But it is absolutely on the decline. Did I have anything else to say about that? Not really. All right, folks, I'm going to go to the bathroom one more time. Hopefully the last time. And then we're going to jump into our main event for today and talk about the Soviet-Afghan War. So prepare yourselves. Prepare yourselves. For now, enjoy me wrestling. And I'll be back in like a minute.
Yeah. You wanted. Passive red. Three, two, one. Oh no.
Martin Cosgrove to mat 17. Goes from England Northwest to mat 20.
We back. All right, let's get to work. All right, it's time for Armchair Historian, the Soviet-Afghan War. Again, if you guys want to contribute to the Buy Eddie a Car Fund, you can do so by sending a super chat or supporting us on patreon.com/MidwesternMarks, or sending it straight to our PayPal, paypal.com/MidwesternMarks.
Yesterday we posted.
And I will answer any super chat questions that you send as we react to this. I have the voice to text or text to voice on, so if you ask me a question in the middle of this, I will hear it. And we'll later upload this to YouTube, so your question will be forever enshrined in the halls of YouTube. In my video about the Soviet-Afghan War, which I don't believe I have ever covered before. Hold on, I need to pull up my notes on a separate screen because I don't want to forget anything, and this is a complicated thing. How do I do this? Okay. So, Armchair Historian, not the worst of the liberal history channels, right? He has some decent videos, but this one is not great. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen. It's not just pure propaganda, but there's a lot of stuff that's left out that obviously demonizes the Soviets and downplays not only the role of the United States in this conflict, but also the role of the Saudis and the Pakistani military government. You know, he kind of mentions it in passing that the U.S. gave them $3.2 billion, but it's near the end, and his timeline for when that happens is off. So let's check it out. The Beast is a pretty alright movie about the Soviet-Afghan War. Maybe I'll check that out. So for those who don't know, this is when the U.S. was funding and arming Osama bin Laden, and a lot of the people who eventually went on to organize 9/11. And in one of the Rambo movies, at the end, it says this movie is dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters. And they were talking about the jihadists, the CIA-backed jihadists in Afghanistan who were fighting against the communists in the Soviet Union. And this is also where we got that notorious article where The Independent, a UK outlet, called Osama bin Laden an anti-Soviet warrior putting his army on the road to peace before he became public enemy number one for the United States. Well, pretend public enemy number one. They used him as a scapegoat to invade Iraq and Afghanistan for imperial reasons. But anyways, folks, let's just get into it, shall we? Let's play at 1.5 speed so we're not here all day. And let's go.
Yesterday we posted the trailer to our biggest project yet, an uncensored free documentary covering the entire history of ISIS, premiering over on our website, Armchair History TV. Use code FREEHISTORY to watch today for free. On December 27, 1979, Chairman Hafizullah Amin of Afghanistan celebrated. After religious insurgents, democratic activists, and even rival communists had taken up arms, Amin had finally secured a Soviet military presence to help him control his rebellious nation. He proudly told his dinner guests, "The Soviet divisions are already on their way here. Paratroopers have landed in Kabul. All is going well." However, they were not there to help him. By dawn the next day, Amin would be dead, and the Soviets would enter a conflict from which they would never recover. The Soviet decision to invade Afghanistan was the result of decades of geopolitical interests and sunk costs. During much of the Cold War,
Look at that imagery there. The evil Soviet hand. Even though the Soviet government, both Amin's government and the government before him, requested that the Soviets come help them. It's the evil Soviet hand controlling Afghanistan. Ooh, where's the CIA hand? Where's the CIA puppet masters? Why don't they get portrayed as puppet masters when the Soviets do? Interesting.
Afghanistan was a neutral state, closely orbiting the Soviet Union. The landlocked kingdom was a springboard for Soviet influence in the Middle East and India. Through millions of dollars in economic investment, officer training, and diplomatic support, the Soviets kept the mountainous realm on a tight leash. Initially, this tight leash meant a close alliance between the communist juggernaut and the Afghan leadership. Afghanistan welcomed Soviet assistance, especially since their deep rivalry with Pakistan left the kingdom without any partners. However, the conservative, religious, and nationalist Afghan people generally resented Soviet influence. Anti-communist incidents throughout the 1960s and 1970s worried the Kremlin that their influence over Afghanistan.
How much influence was it really, though? Because as one of the chatters was saying earlier, it was a monarchy that was not communist, right? The Soviets were just helping them develop. The Soviets were just giving them developmental loans and helping them develop their infrastructure and industry and things like that. It's not like this was some kind of Soviet puppet government, you know, it was a monarchy. But the Soviets saw that monarchy as preferable to having a bunch of conservative jihadists running the country. So they helped them develop economically, much like China does today.
Afghanistan might be threatened. The 1970s were a turbulent time in Afghan politics. The monarchy was toppled in 1973 by Mohammad Dawood Khan, much to the Kremlin's approval. The Soviets expected him to be little more than a figurehead, while the Soviet-trained officers held the real power. However, Dawood proved more independent.
So very interesting that he says Afghanistan was kept on a tight leash. They were a Soviet puppet. But then they also approved when that Soviet puppet government was overthrown by Dawood. But anyways, Dawood was a liberal aristocratic reformer, right? He enacted the country's election, or he enacted elections in the country for the first time. There were 4 women who were elected to Afghan parliament for the first time. And this is what ultimately started the jihadist conservative uprising. It wasn't actually the communists coming to power. It was the right-wingers who were mad that they were getting rid of monarchy, enacting elections, allowing women to attend school and to take part in politics for the first time. So this is when a lot of the insurgency by the quote-unquote mujahideen really began.
Than expected. The Afghan president increasingly maintained an anti-communist, anti-Soviet dictatorship. His policies came to a head on April 26, 1978, after major demonstrations following the death of a prominent communist Afghan ideologue. Dawood imprisoned the communist opposition and planned to execute them. Hafizullah Amin, a prominent Afghan communist under house arrest, decided to act first. The morning after, communist revolutionaries stormed the presidential palace. After a fierce fight, they...
So the other thing about Dawood, when he calls him a dictator, Dawood recognized that in order to push through this progressive agenda with elections and anti-monarchy policies and things like this and instituting more widespread education, he realized that a lot of the right-wing, conservative, monarchist, jihadist elements would need to be taken out. So when he calls Dawood a dictator, he was a liberal reformer who was targeting, you know, extremist jihadist groups. And under him, a lot of these jihadist... Oh, jeez. Knocked over my screen. I just kicked my desk. Hold up. Oh, geez, let me make sure. That's the CIA. They did that. The CIA made me kick my desk. So under Daoud, a lot of these jihadist groups fled to Pakistan, which had Pakistan! I will sacrifice my own life for Pakistan. Pakistan had a right-wing military dictatorship, and a lot of these jihadist elements fled there and were given refuge and started recruiting more. And they were heavily funded by Saudi Arabia while they were there. And they would come across the border and attack Afghan civilians and progressive liberal Afghans, communist Afghans. So Daoud was targeting them. It's hard to say that he was a dictator when he was transitioning the country. I mean, I guess in the same way that like Robespierre and like the French revolutionaries were dictators. He was trying to do like a bourgeois revolution. He was trying to get rid of monarchy and move the country towards a more modern political system. And in order to do that, like with any bourgeois revolution, he had to repress the old feudal reactionary elements of society, which in this case were jihadists. Yo!
07.
07, Simpy. $50 super chat. Thank you very much, brother. I don't know what to say. The Buy Eddie a Car fund just like doubled. Sooner or later, I'm going to be driving a sick whip, thanks to you guys. Thank you very much, Simpy. I appreciate you, brother.
Overwhelmed the presidential guard. Daoud was killed, and a new government under Nur Mohammad Taraki took over. While the role of the Soviet Union in the coup is debated, there is no question that the events were welcomed by the Kremlin. Moscow recognized the new regime almost immediately. However, Soviet hopes for a secure and loyal Afghanistan would remain a pipe dream. Taraki embarked on a radical reconstruction of Afghan society. His regime decreased the role of Islam in society, pushed through controversial land reform, invited countless Soviet advisors, and terrorized the people into submission. His rule marked the start of a series of uprisings.
Terrorized the people into submission. Bro, he was fighting literal terrorists. He was literally fighting Osama bin Laden and these right-wing jihadist elements. What Taraki was doing was, this is probably the most hopeful time in Afghan history. One of the main things that he did was launch massive literacy campaigns where thousands of literacy workers were going out into the rural regions and teaching people how to read. And these jihadist elements would come over the border from Pakistan with their Saudi weapons and Saudi money, and just lynch literacy workers en masse, massacre literacy workers. And of course, they were reactionary, so they didn't think women should be going to school. They would throw acid on the faces of women for going to school and learning how to read. So the U.S. calls an armchair historian, calls the guy who was building schools and launching literacy campaigns a terrorist, someone who terrorized his own people, and the jihadists who were throwing acid on the faces of women for learning how to read are the freedom fighters. I mean, armchair historian doesn't go as far as to call them freedom fighters. He just conveniently leaves out what the politics of these people were and what they were actually doing. But I reject that characterization that Taraki was terrorizing the people into submission. He was fighting jihadist elements and teaching people how to read and building hospitals. And he was a flawed leader. He was overly dependent on the Soviets for support, but
by various conservative Islamic clans.
Someone says, Eddie, I just want to tell you it was under the 1964 king that elections and women's rights were enacted. Daoud thought the king's governance was ineffective. Really? I know under Daoud it was the first time that women got elected to parliament, but the source that I read that from, that Daoud was the first to enact elections, that could have been wrong, for sure. Interesting.
These would be united under the umbrella term Mujahideen, who used Afghanistan's inhospitable and mountainous terrain to wage highly effective guerrilla warfare. The situation would once again change radically when Taraki was assassinated by his second-in-command, Hafizullah Amin. Although he repeatedly professed his love and loyalty to the Kremlin, Moscow saw Amin as incapable at best and treacherous at worst. Within 2 months of his rise, the Politburo decided direct intervention was needed to secure Soviet interests in Afghanistan. The Politburo had been divided on actual military intervention. The KGB, however, was adamant Amin was a threat to Soviet interests. The plan was to replace Amin with their puppet, Babrak Karmal. To facilitate the transition, 80,000 soldiers, 1,800 tanks, and 2,000 armored vehicles would enter Afghanistan.
That is not why they entered Afghanistan. They did not enter Afghanistan because they didn't like Amin. It's true that they didn't like Amin, right? Amin was a schemer. He was someone they didn't trust. He killed someone that he was calling his friend, right? Calling his brother in arms. He killed him to take power, right? There was terrible infighting within the communist Afghan government at the time, the Marxist Democratic government at the time, between Taraki and Amin. And Amin, of course, killed him. So the Soviets did want to get rid of him. But the reason that they invaded was because of the Mujahideen, right? Because they didn't want Afghanistan to become a CIA-dominated puppet government of the West. And before the Soviets invaded, what Armchair Historian conveniently leaves out is that the CIA was already funding and arming and training the Mujahideen at this point. Right? He just conveniently leaves that out of the timeline, but the CIA was already there before the Soviets ever got involved, doing Operation Cyclone, as it's now known, funneling money and arms and support into these anti-communist, jihadist, conservative, monarchist rebels. And the other context that he conveniently leaves out is this was right after the coup of Allende in Chile that installed Pinochet, who proceeded to commit horrific massacres and torture campaigns against communists, very similar to what the Mujahideen were trying to do in Afghanistan. And it was after the Jakarta method in Indonesia, right? So there were two situations where you had socialist-leaning or nationalist governments where the CIA and CIA proxies were able to overthrow those governments and commit mass-scale atrocities against communists. So within that context, the Soviet Union decided to get involved to stop that from happening. And within the context of the CIA trying to do the same thing that they did in Indonesia and Chile in Afghanistan, which of course shares a border with the Soviet Union. So it was much more important for the Soviet Union to make sure that Afghanistan didn't become a puppet state. And to prove that, their goal wasn't just to overthrow Amin, Amin was begging them to come too, right? Amin was begging them, saying, please come help us fight these CIA-backed jihadists, these Saudi-backed jihadists. We need assistance. And in the end, the Soviets did topple Amin, just as he toppled Taraki before him. But that was not the justification for the intervention. It wasn't that they saw Amin as untrustworthy and they needed to get rid of him. Amin was begging them to come help fight the jihadists. And, once Amin was gone, they stayed there and continued fighting the jihadists. It's just very, very sneaky framing by Armchair Historian to make it sound like the Soviets were doing this for control. Which, in a sense they were. They didn't want Afghanistan to become a CIA puppet government. They'd prefer it be a communist government. But it wasn't like a regime change war in the same way that the U.S. went into Indonesia or Chile to topple their leader and put in a puppet, right? It was absolutely aimed at the CIA-backed jihadists. They just thought Amin was untrustworthy and incompetent, which he probably was. And also, there was much division within the Soviet Politburo at this point. A lot of them didn't want to go. Andropov was strongly against invading.
December 17th, Leonid Brezhnev had signed the invasion decree. By the time of the invasion order, Soviet troops and operatives already permeated the Afghan army. Soviet advisors were everywhere in Afghan command. A month earlier, Soviet forces, disguised as Afghans, were incorporated into the Presidential Security Forces.
Another thing that he doesn't mention is that Amin actually was harshly repressing the people, and the Soviets thought that this was worsening the rebellions. The Soviets were like, Amin is too harsh, he's too dictatorial, which Armchair Historian never mentions. He calls every other leader in Afghan history an evil dictator, except for Amin, because the Soviets got rid of him. But that was one of the internal conversations that the Soviets were having. They're like, Amin is too brutal. He's cracking down on his people. So and this is turning people against him and worsening the rebellion. So, the Soviets were fighting against brutal repression against the people, in a way.
Soviet regiments had also assured access to several key roads, notably the road between Kabul and Soviet territory. On the night of Christmas Eve, the Soviet 40th Army started its first incursion into Afghanistan. As soldiers crossed into the north of the country, Soviet technicians and advisors within the Afghan army sabotaged an organized Afghan response. 2 days later, the coup to overthrow Amin began. Codenamed Operation Storm 333, the goals were to take the Tajbek Palace and kill Amin, occupy various key government buildings, and block the Afghan army from reinforcing Kabul. The Soviets dispatched 13 groups for these objectives, which were a mix of Spetsnaz, paratroopers, and Afghan collaborators. The Afghans had reinforced the palace. Earlier botched plans to poison Amin had put the defense on high alert. In total, the Afghans had around 2,500 forces present. Nonetheless, the defenses were quickly over.
Yo, what was that? Did that skull have a hammer and sickle on it?
2,500 forces present. Nonetheless, the defenses had around 2,500 forces. Earlier botched plans to poison Amin had put the defense on.
Bro, what is that? What is this imagery? The skull with the hammer and sickle. They were also installing another communist leader too, That's hilarious. Why wasn't there a skull when Amin killed his predecessor? I don't know. That's just hilarious.
The defense on high alert. In total, the Afghans had around 2,500 forces present. Nonetheless, the defenses were quickly overwhelmed. After a short but fierce battle, lasting no longer than 45 minutes, Soviet forces entered the palace, systematically cleared its rooms, and killed Amin. That same night, Karmal was flown in. The operation had left 300 Afghan soldiers killed and thousands surrendering. At the cost of 15 operatives killed, the Soviets were now in complete control of Kabul. Operation Storm 333 marked the start of the occupation of Afghanistan.
Not entirely true that they were in complete control. They installed Karmal, but he was not necessarily a Soviet puppet. He was someone the Soviets were. He was already an important figure in Afghan politics before the Soviets put him in charge as the leader. And he was someone that the Soviets were very wary of in the 70s, who they didn't fully trust. But because he had support among people in Afghanistan, they thought he would be the best leader. And his relationship with the Soviets would later sour because, it was under Gorbachev and stuff, so, who's to say what actually happened there. But it's not like this was just some Soviet puppet leader who was taking total orders from Moscow. He was supportive of the Soviet Union, but he was an independent political actor who the Soviets didn't necessarily trust. And what he also leaves out, armchair historian, not only what the jihadists were doing with throwing acid on the faces of people, but he also leaves out that at this point, once the Soviets invaded, Jimmy Carter, I believe, who was the guy, Zbigniew, I can never remember how to pronounce his name. Zbigniew. Hold on. Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski. I can never remember how to pronounce his name. But he later said that their goal, the Soviets just wanted to come in and stabilize the situation. But Brzezinski said, we want to make this the Soviets' Vietnam. Right? We want to turn this situation into one where the Soviets can't leave. We don't want there to be peace. We don't want this Marxist democratic government to stabilize the situation. And this is when training and arms and support for the Mujahideen really shot through the roof. Because once the Soviets were in, the U.S. wanted to keep them there. They wanted to continue destabilizing the situation, no matter what kind of horrific terror groups they had to fund and arm, in order to make sure that the Soviets were stuck there, wasting a bunch of resources. So that's just not mentioned at all by armchair historian, that once the Soviets got there, They wanted to just stabilize the situation and start building hospitals and schools and establishing a modern government. The U.S. said we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that these jihadists continue waging guerrilla warfare against the Marxist democratic government.
The invasion followed 2 main land routes and 1 air corridor. The Red Army quickly took core strategic targets, like cities and military strongpoints, but failed to deal with the Mujahideen in the countryside. The Soviet Army lacked a strategy to fight the guerrilla war, meaning the occupation quickly devolved into a pattern. The Soviets held the major cities, while the opposition held sway in the remote Afghan countryside.
And this has been a problem with like semi-feudal Middle Eastern countries and Marxist movements there in the past. Is the same thing with the Tudeh party in Iran, where you had more industry in the cities, and it was, whereas in China and Russia, they were able to consolidate support of the peasants in the rural regions and create this proletarian peasant alliance. In the Middle Eastern countries, it's always been like a much more orthodox Marxist situation, I guess you would say, where because industry was developing in the cities, you had students and proletarians who were like Marxists and communists, and then more reactionary politics in the rural regions. And this has prevented a lot of Marxist communist governments from coming to power in those regions. So you really have to and that's a criticism of communist parties in that region that you could also criticize. Thank you, Chris, for subscribing. That you could also criticize American communist parties for, where all their support was consolidated in the cities, and they didn't do enough of what Mao said, or at least not successfully enough, of going down to the countryside and reaching the rural masses, which in this case, when they did go down to the countryside, they were being attacked with acid and Saudi, Pakistani, U.S. weapons and U.S.-backed terror groups, right? But it goes to show that if you want to consolidate support as a communist country, you have to consolidate support of at least large sections of the rural regions. You can't just be based in the cities. In China, it was kind of the opposite. They went down to the countryside and surrounded the cities with communist rural workers. So, just an interesting Marxist theory point there.
The Mujahideen resistance was one of several problems the Soviets faced in Afghanistan. While they expected to be hailed as liberators, the Soviets achieved little but to unite the Afghan people against them. Karmal's armed forces proved untrustworthy and inefficient, forcing the Soviet army to deal with mutinies and uprisings. What started as a simple supportive action to facilitate a coup became a long...
And who was funding that, bro? And no, it wasn't just an action to facilitate a coup. They were there to fight against the Mujahideen, like all the Afghan leaders had asked them to, including Amin. But who was supporting the Mujahideen at this time? Who was training them and giving them directives to lead these uprisings and these attacks against the Marxist democratic government and against the Soviets? It was the CIA. Giving them billions of dollars. How do you tell this story and just leave that part out? I'm not trying to say the Soviets were perfect or denying that the Soviets toppled Amin, right? Or that every strategic decision they made was benevolent. Of course not. But how do you tell this story and leave out the fact that the U.S. policymakers explicitly said that their goal was to make this the Soviets' Vietnam? To ensure that the Mujahideen kept fighting and kept making life hell for the Soviets there. It's like, even if you're a liberal, just leaving that out of the story is like Fed shit. Even if you're a liberal who hates the Soviet Union, right? To not mention that the CIA was orchestrating all of this from behind the scenes is ridiculous.
Term occupation, provoking unrest and international condemnation. Content creation can be hard to streamline, especially animated content. Finding an efficient way to turn scripts and storyboards, streamlining fulfillment, consumes valuable time and ShipStation, a multi-carrier solution that integrates flow so that your business...
We aren't giving you our money, bro.
To use dashboard, a breeze, as well as the everyone's that are automatic and discounts. The innovative tool that Armchair to sign up. Initially, Moscow stood alone. The United Nations overwhelmingly condemned the invasion. the United States imposed a trade embargo on various Soviet products, led by a boycott of the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow, and stranded the SALT II treaty in the Senate. China and many Arabic countries condemned the Soviet invasion, demanding the immediate withdrawal of Soviet troops.
So this is another interesting point. With the Sino-Soviet split, China believed that the Soviet Union was getting too involved in other countries. Bro made an ad out of drawing Yahtzees. He did. And this is where the idea of Soviet social imperialism comes from. Like the CIA did try to basically use projection and accuse the Soviet Union of imperialism constantly, and they said as much openly in now declassified documents, right? But there was a criticism of the Soviets from China, which is where modern Chinese foreign policy comes from, based in complete non-interventionism, where they were like the Soviets were getting a little bit too involved in foreign countries, and it was leading to disaster. It was leading to problems domestically. Now, Afghanistan, I don't know, because the Soviets shared a border with them, and they were, the side that they were fighting for was objectively progressive, and they were fighting against CIA-backed jihadists. But like what the Soviets did in Iran with telling the Tudeh party the line that they had to take on the Iran crisis, that was absolutely an overstep and a strategic mistake. So there is legitimacy to this inter-Marxist criticism that the Chinese had of the Soviets with Soviet social imperialism. And yeah, I don't know. I kind of disagree with China going along with the UN and condemning them for this. But it's an interesting historical fact where now China's whole thing is we're not going to get involved in your politics. We're just going to trade with you and help you develop infrastructure. Because we don't want to get sucked into these global conflicts that ruin our reputation on the global scale, give the U.S. a propaganda victory, and drain our resources and troops. Which people criticize, all these ultras criticize China for not getting involved in all these other countries and in foreign conflicts, but it makes sense why they did, because ultimately Afghanistan did turn into a disaster for the Soviets and helped drain them of resources at a time when they were already on the collapse. North Star Radio, 11 months as a member. Thank you, brother. Appreciate your constant support. Everybody go subscribe to North Star Radio if you haven't already. That's my boy. The greatest or the slayer of Ethan Klein, I'll say. North Star is brilliant with the way he comments on like mainstream leftist drama in the United States and uses it to go viral while pushing a Marxist-Leninist perspective. It's truly brilliant stuff. I wish everybody understood the internet and American culture as well as him. So everyone subscribe. Thoughts on muscular Christianity? It's based. Muscular Christianity is Marxist Christianity, in my opinion. Thank you very much, North Star. Eddie streams make my day that much better. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Yeah, North Star Radio is the dude. Where are we?
Opposition would not be limited to just words. The Afghan Mujahideen received military aid from several nations, including the United States, the United Kingdom, and especially Pakistan. By 1980, the failure of the Soviet plan,
especially Pakistan, especially the US, $3.2 billion. And that was happening before the Soviets got involved. That's what you don't ever talk about. The CIA and the US were already giving the Mujahideen support before the Soviets ever got there. It's never mentioned in this video.
Was on full display. The cities and major roads were mostly under Soviet control, but about 85% of Afghanistan was controlled by the guerrilla fighters of the Mujahideen. The attacks in the mountainous Afghan hinterlands failed to yield any results. The Soviets increasingly played a defensive role, brutally suppressing anti-Soviet activity in the areas under their control. The Red Army and their Afghan allies violently quashed protests like the 3 Hut uprising in February 1980 and the student demonstrations 2 months later, killing around 800 and arresting up to 7,000 people. Adding to Soviet pressure was the Mujahideen.
So believe it or not, I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but these were not just organic student protests and peaceful protests that the Soviets were just going out and gunning people down. Right? There definitely were protests that were suppressed, but, just like with Tiananmen Square and, all the other U.S. color revolution efforts in communist countries, these were organized by the CIA and they were overwhelmingly violent. Right? There were some peaceful protests, but protesting was just a part of their strategy. So, for example, in one of the places where there was a quote unquote peaceful student protest, anti-government students killed 17 pro-Kemal students, lynched a Marxist female principal because she was a female. And again, these are like ultra-conservative religious elements. And they attacked a Soviet military convoy. So, as the Soviet Union was trying to build schools and hospitals in Afghanistan in order to garner goodwill with the people, these US-backed forces, in not just in the rural regions but in the cities as well, were lynching, female principals and pro-government Marxist communist students in the country. So, it's just like with any color revolution, right? They portray it as these peaceful pro-democracy protests, when in reality, just like with Euromaidan in Ukraine, these protests are being led by the most reactionary elements, and they're engaging in all sorts of violence against innocent people and government officials. And U.S. intelligence reports confirm this. They say that urban protesters, and this was organized by the CIA, urban protesters aim to assassinate government officials, conduct sabotage and arson, and attack Soviet military convoys along with protests. Protests were just a part of the strategy, sort of a cover-up, right? Not only to show discontent and, but also to create a propaganda narrative that these are just peaceful protesters and peaceful students protesting the big bad Soviet government, and they're being brutally repressed. But they were lynching female educators and massacring students, and having all of it organized by the Central Intelligence Agency. But if you're aware of how the U.S. does color revolution efforts, this should come as no surprise to you, because it's always the same thing. Same thing in Iran, where they said there were peaceful protesters only recently, and in reality they were like lynching police officers. There's that video. Everybody in my world was tweeting about that wrestler, or posting about that wrestler who got executed by the government. But in reality, he killed 2 security guards or police officers with a machete. Right? So they organize these violent uprisings and then call them peaceful protests, and then condemn the government for cracking down on them. That is the color revolution playbook to a T.
Who constantly disrupted the supply lines into these Soviet-controlled cities. The Kremlin hoped these challenges would be answered by Karmal's troops, who constantly proved completely incapable of dealing with the situation. This forced the Soviets to commit yet more troops and resources, especially to secure the road between Kabul and...
That's probably true, but I mean, they didn't, the people they were fighting were getting billions of dollars from the US, who were just trying to keep the Soviets there and draw the Soviets in and get them to waste their resources. But it is probably true that the Afghan troops were way over-reliant on the Soviets.
The Soviet border. This road went by the Panjshir Valley, where warlord Ahmad Shah Massoud permanently threatened Red Army logistics. The Soviets launched 9 offensives in attempts...
Scumbag. They just call him a warlord. They don't mention that he hated women and was attacking schools and was a jihadist terrorist backed by the right-wing Pakistani military dictatorship, who would throw acid on the faces of women for going to school and learning how to read. Just leave that part out. Call him the resistance. Call him a warlord. Don't mention that he was a CIA Saudi-funded puppet who was throwing acid on the faces of little girls because they wanted to learn how to read and go to school. At schools that were being built by the Soviets.
To dislodge him, and every single time, the guerrillas used the terrain to foil these offensives. The Mujahideen also received considerable international assistance. Over 6 years, the CIA funneled $3.2 billion worth of weapons, economic assistance, and military training to the Mujahideen and their Pakistan.
See how he just drops that in at the end? He doesn't mention that they were funding the Mujahideen before the Soviets got there. He doesn't mention the uptick in support when the U.S. explicitly said they wanted to make Afghanistan the Soviet Vietnam. They never mentioned that was the U.S. strategy to draw the Soviets further in. And they never mentioned that the CIA was organizing these quote-unquote peaceful protests. All of that's just totally left out, and he drops at the end. They received considerable support from the U.S. It's a little bit deeper than that, armchair.
Any allies. This notably included surface-to-air missiles that challenged Soviet aerial dominance. Pakistan played a major role in this conflict as well. It served as a key ally, financier, and operational base for the Mujahideen. Britain's MI6 was also deeply involved. It notably...
Why aren't we showing any skulls? Why aren't there skulls floating on the screen with the American flag on them? Remember that puppet imagery they used before with the Soviet hand controlling Afghanistan like a puppet? Where's the CIA puppet hand? Why is the imagery designed to demonize the Soviets? And then we just mention at the end, oh yeah, the CIA was supporting these jihadist terrorists. Except we're not going to call them jihadist terrorists. We'll call them the resistance. It's disgusting.
assisted Massoud in the Panjshir Valley, supplying his forces with high-tech equipment, but it also provided training to Mujahideen forces through its office in Islamabad. Between 1981 and 1985, both forces used brutal tactics on each other and the civilian population. The Soviets used chemical weapons, airstrikes
both forces, both sides. Both sides bad. The Soviets built schools and hospitals, while the Mujahideen threw acid on the faces of people for going to school, but both sides bad.
Civilian targets and massacres of civilians suspected of sabotaging the Red Army. Various Mujahideen factions engaged in extreme...
They weren't suspected of sabotaging the Red Army, they were. They were. The CIA and U.S. intelligence admitted this themselves. You can look at their leaked documents or declassified documents. They admitted themselves that they were training students and quote-unquote peaceful protesters to sabotage the Soviets and commit arson, not just against Soviet military installations, but against like hospitals and schools that the Soviets were building. So it's not alleged. It's not like they were just massacring peaceful protesters alleged of doing these things. They were doing these things and they weren't peaceful.
Torture. By the end of 1985, over 4 million Afghans had engaged in extreme torture. By the end, civilian targets and massacres of civilians suspected of sabotaging the Red Army. Various Mujahideen factions engaged in extreme torture. By the end of...
So he lists off like 10 different things that the Red Army was doing. They were massacring civilians and using chemical weapons and shooting peaceful protesters and accusing people of sabotaging the Red Army who didn't, even though they did. And the Mujahideen also engaged in torture. He says one thing about the Mujahideen, these jihadist terrorists, the people who would later organize 9/11, and who the U.S. would start 2 full-scale invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, allegedly to fight against, even though that wasn't the goal. They funded and armed these jihadists and then started 2 wars in the Middle East to supposedly fight them. But he lists all these supposedly evil things that the Soviets did, and then just says the Mujahideen engaged in torture. It was a lot more than that, buddy. It was a lot more than just torture. It was attacks against civilians. It was the lynching of students and principals and educators. It was the setting on fire of military and civilian buildings. It was throwing acid on the faces of females because they wanted to learn how to read. But yeah, let's just leave it at extreme torture, you scumbag.
1985, over 4 million Afghans had fled the country. These ruthless measures did little to end the war in either side's favor. The Soviets were drawn further and further into an unwinnable conflict. To the new Secretary General, Mikhail Gorbachev...
They did little to end the war because the U.S. and the Mujahideen didn't want to end the war. They said that explicitly. This is a well-known fact. That they said they wanted to draw the Soviet Union in. They wanted to perpetuate the war. Because they make money off of war and because they wanted to weaken the Soviets. And they didn't care how many Afghans had to die in order to do so. But let's just leave that out. Doesn't matter. Who cares what U.S. officials and intelligence agencies actually said about their strategy? Let's just leave it all out.
That was abundantly clear. Under his leadership, the Soviets started to search for an exit strategy. The challenge mainly consisted of withdrawing from Afghanistan while saving face. To accomplish that goal, the Kremlin set out on a gradual withdrawal.
Lorshek says the Soviets built the Salang Tunnel at Kabul, saving days of travel, an engineering marvel. That's cool. That's cool. Yeah, they were doing a lot of like building at this time too. Like I said, with the hospitals and schools, they were trying to garner goodwill by like developing infrastructure at the same time that they were fighting these jihadists. But there was just too much U.S. money coming in, and the Soviet Union was already in decline at this point. As you could see, Gorbachev was in power when they were still at war with Afghanistan. So internally, the Soviet Union was declining. The U.S. knew that, and the U.S. wanted to draw them further into Afghanistan to exhaust their resources. And then scumbag Gorbachev came in and said, we need to withdraw and utilize all the money we spent in Afghanistan on building Pizza Huts,
while strengthening the communist regime to a point where it could survive on its own. To strengthen national consolidation, Gorbachev removed Karmal. He stated that the main reason that there has been no national consolidation so far is that Comrade Karmal is hoping to continue sitting in Kabul with our help. He was replaced by Mohammad Najibullah. Although
there's probably truth to that, but Gorbachev was such an opportunist scumbag. He didn't care about Afghanistan. He just wanted to get out because the war was seen as a waste of resources and Soviet life. And he already knew he was going to sell out his own country and that the Soviet Union was already in decline. He didn't care about actually stabilizing Afghanistan. But there's probably truth to the fact that Karmal was kind of just thinking he could sit in power with Soviet resources and have them do all the fighting. Which is another reason, you know, China gives for like not wanting to get too involved in other countries, because you get involved thinking you can just help a Marxist government take power and leave, but it doesn't really work that way. When you have the CIA on the other end funding your opposition and funding and arming the reactionaries, every time the Soviets tried to do something like that, or a lot of the times they ended up getting sucked further in, and then it creates like a dependency, almost like a welfare mindset, I guess, to use a conservative term, where they're like, oh, they'll always protect us. We don't need to do that much to actually stabilize. But at the same time, it is really hard to have a revolution when you're fighting the CIA without any foreign support.
he tried to reunite the country by releasing prisoners, legalizing political parties, and positioning Islam as a unifying factor, mistrust towards the government persisted. Alongside the change in leadership, the Soviet Union gradually started to distance itself from military activities in Afghanistan. It grew the Afghan army and restricted Soviet activities to assisting roles. Although the army grew rapidly, it also suffered a 10% annual desertion rate, and new attacks against the Mujahideen failed to yield any concrete results. In 1988, the Geneva Accords were signed between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Both nations agreed to refrain from interference in each other's territory and allow Afghan refugees to voluntarily return to their homes. The agreement was also signed by the Soviets and the United States, who acted as guarantors. By signing the accords, the Soviet Union officially committed to withdrawal, which would take place over the following year. Soviet withdrawal was completed in two waves, with the first during the summer of 1988 and the second over the following winter. The withdrawal was mostly conducted peacefully, with the notable exception of Operation Typhoon. As the withdrawal took place, the Soviets negotiated ceasefires with local Mujahideen commanders. Among them was Ahmad Shah Massoud, still holding the Panjshir Valley. Dmitry Yazov, the defense minister of the Soviet Union, feared that his troops posed an existential threat to Najibullah's regime after the Soviets withdrew. Here, Yazov ordered the 40th Army to violate the agreement with Massoud. The attack resulted in 600 Mujahideen casualties. In the end, the final operation of the Soviets in Afghanistan was emblematic of the entire conflict. It accomplished no significant strategic goal and left hundreds dead. For the Soviet Union, the war was a fiasco. It had cost them billions.
Again, Massoud was a scumbag, so it's kind of based of them to try and take him out before they left. But I believe after the Soviets left, it became like the most brutal time, the most brutal period in Afghanistan's history, where they had an absolute dictatorship, and support was consolidated by Islamic factions, more conservative factions. What kind of gripper do you use? I have this one, then I have one that's like impossible to squeeze. This one's like brutal. Ugh, but this one's easy. So I like this one when I'm streaming. Helps me keep my hands busy.
Of dollars and around 70,000 casualties. Furthermore, it had damaged the reputation of the Soviet Union beyond repair. The capability of the Red Army was cast in doubt, emboldening anti-Soviet sentiment, leaving many potential detractors to believe that the mighty superpower could be defeated. Veterans openly critiqued Soviet leadership, weakening the Communist Party's stranglehold over public discourse. Within a year, the Eastern Bloc would collapse, and the state itself only lasted 2 more years.
So that U.S. strategy of turning this into the Soviet Vietnam was largely successful. This part is, fairly true. It became sort of viewed as a disaster in the Soviet Union. All these resources and lives wasted to achieve no real strategic goals. What he doesn't mention is that was the U.S.'s explicit stated goal, was to weaken the USSR by drawing them into a forever war. And they accomplished that goal, and a few years later, the Soviet Union would collapse. It was already on its way to collapse by 1988, of course, but the Afghan War definitely accelerated it or contributed to it.
War had left Afghanistan in a state of disrepair and turmoil. Najibullah, too, failed to unite the country. The Mujahideen continued fighting, transforming the Soviet-Afghan War into the first Afghan civil war. Mujahideen factions, democratic forces, and ultimately the Taliban would take control of Afghanistan. The war led to
Yeah, and this is considered the most brutal time in Afghanistan's history, where it was just like hell living there, which even today, like Afghanistan, one of my buddies was stationed there, and one of the craziest things about modern Afghanistan is during the summer, they call it the fighting season, because during the winter months, not that it ever gets real cold there, but during a certain part of the year, all the fighting ceases because it's harder for people to survive, right? It's still a semi-feudal country, so it's harder for people to get water and to get food. So they kind of go on, have like a ceasefire, and the different groups stop fighting. Obviously, the U.S. isn't there anymore, so things have probably changed. I think the Taliban's probably consolidated a lot of control in that region, but they would stop fighting, and then when the summer came, they would call that the fighting season. So it's easier to get food and water. We go right back to fighting. So that's the situation the U.S. left Afghanistan in. And of course, they would invade in 2001, allegedly, to fight the same groups that they helped to put in power.
Approximately 2 million deaths, over 7 million internal and external refugees, and
2 million deaths and 7 million refugees, bro. There's freedom and democracy for you. And that's before the U.S. invaded again in 2001 and occupied the country and ran it like an opium plantation for 20 years.
Afghanistan into a spiral of political instability, factionalism, and extremism, from which it has yet to emerge.
That part's true, at least. Afghanistan has been advancing their infrastructure lately, which is interesting. Yeah, and China is doing deals with the Taliban, helping them build up their infrastructure. So ultimately, like if I could go back in time, obviously I would say the best outcome for Afghanistan would be for the CIA to not fund the Mujahideen and for the Marxist democratic government to remain in power. But we can't go back in time. So ultimately, I think the best thing for them is that the U.S. withdrew, and rather than having a bunch of different factional groups fighting themselves, you have one group, even if I don't think they're, even if I'm not aligned with them politically, of course, in the Taliban, but you have one group consolidate power and start developing infrastructure and doing real trade deals with China rather than just being in a constant state of civil war or being an opium plantation for the U.S. It's not, it's no paragon of democracy or communist politics or anything like that today. They have some semblance of sovereignty, more so than they used to. So even the Taliban treat people better than American democracy and freedom experts, coincidentally finding oil and gold. Yep, exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, obviously the Taliban isn't our preferred group as Marxists, but they treat their people better than the U.S. did. And dude, some of the stories my friend told me when he was in Afghanistan are just crazy. Some of the videos he showed me, like U.S. troops were just running wild there. The corruption was insane. They were literally just running opium plantations and doing whatever they wanted to the people in this like semi-feudal country. There's a real crazy story he told me about the military basically trying to keep people fighting there. I may have told it in the past. I'm not gonna tell it because I don't want to get him in trouble or get the freaking feds on my case. But basically, he said that they did some kind of operation to try and keep different groups fighting in Afghanistan and prevent one group from seizing control. We really effed up Afghanistan. We did. Afghanistan has rail to Iran. Interesting. I'm not surprised. Johnny Keller says, "What are your thoughts on climate change?" Bro, what are we... That's so random, bro. But we were actually talking about that earlier. Where I think nuclear is the real solution. And we were saying that America has become so deindustrialized and reliant on imports. What we need is to take all the money we're spending on the military and reinvest it in industry and production here in America. But that's a perfect opportunity when you do that. Start doing it with renewables, start doing it with nuclear, start doing it with wind, solar, and things like that, of course, hydropower, but especially nuclear. And create all these new jobs and revive American domestic production, but do it in a way that's ecologically sustainable. It's a perfect opportunity. And as we said earlier, the reason we can't do that right now is because of the power of the oil and gas lobby. Oliver Stone recently did a documentary on Chernobyl where he talked about how the Chernobyl incident was used as a propaganda tool by the U.S. to demonize nuclear, or not by the U.S., but by the oil and gas lobby, to demonize nuclear because it's such an obvious alternative to oil and gas and these other forms of energy that ultimately create ecological problems for us in the long term. So I feel like the word climate change doesn't fully encompass what's going on. There's a good book called Facing the Anthropocene, which is a Marxist analysis of the climate catastrophe that we could be facing due to capitalism. But I like the word ecological degradation because really, quote unquote climate change, the greenhouse effect is just like one part of the problem. The real problem is that we have no control over production. We don't have planned production. We have production for profit. So environmental factors can't be taken into account at all with production. And this creates metabolic rifts in the Earth's natural recycling processes. The Earth has all these processes where it'll sort of on its own recycle certain elements in order to keep the flow of life going. And when you have production that doesn't take that into account at all, even though now we understand a lot of those metabolic cycles due to ecology and science, we just have production for profit. So if there's something we can do that makes money, even if it destroys the earth and those metabolic processes, just like humans have metabolisms, the earth has all these metabolisms. We go with whatever makes us profit, even if it interrupts that metabolism. But if you had a planned mode of production, and China's proving this by building these carbon zero cities and these ecologically sustainable megacities, you can incorporate ecological dynamics into production. And this is what Haas has talked about when he says ecology is just another form of cybernetics, or like understanding of information. We can incorporate our understanding of the Earth's natural processes and what we call ecology into the economic plan of society, into the development of our economy. And it's the profit motive, the anarchy of production, as Marx and Engels call it, that we get under capitalism, that leads to depletion of soil and extinction of various animal groups that are, interconnected with other groups and other plants and things that are good for keeping the Earth's processes going. And then, of course, the greenhouse effect. But, the green, I just don't like the term climate change anymore because, again, it doesn't encompass exactly what's going on. And then it's just like, we need a Green New Deal. We need to vote in the Green New Deal. It's like, man, that's not going to cut it. We need a planned economy. We need a socialist economy that is run and planned for the purpose of benefiting humanity rather than for the purpose of producing as much profits as possible. How do you think the agricultural industry will continue to be industrialized, particularly animal agriculture? That's a good question. I would have to think about that a little bit more, because obviously that's the main carbon emitter, and the main water utilizer is the animal industry, animal agricultural industry. I would have to look into that to see how those can be done more sustainably, but all I know is I ain't eating bugs. One thing you can read is this. It hasn't been written about too much. People are afraid to defend the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. I mean, when I say defend, I just mean debunk all of the Western narratives about it. I'm not saying what the Soviets did was, benevolent by any means. And I made multiple criticisms of them and their strategy throughout the last video, unlike Armchair Historian, who portrays the U.S. as almost benevolent. But the National Security Archive here has a ton of declassified information about the war. When the Soviet archives opened up, we got to know what the Soviets were thinking internally, and their strategic thinking that was going into the war. It shows how they didn't want to get involved at first, and how they eventually did, and how their goal was not to create a puppet government, but to establish a real communist government, and prevent a CIA-backed jihadist government from taking power right on their borders. So I just sent that in the chat for you, the link if you want to learn more. Funny how the Soviet government lasted so much longer after their withdrawal than ours did. Yeah, that's true. It's almost like the Soviet government had more support with the people than what the US puppet government had before it was like instantly toppled. That was like the same as the South Vietnamese government in Saigon, where like as the US helicopters are leaving Vietnam, the government's already being toppled because everybody hated it. I think climate change was first coined by a Republican strategist, Frank Luntz, as a less threatening term than global warming. Interesting. Here's that book. By the way, there's a video I gotta pull up. If you're interested in a socialist analysis of the environment, I don't agree with this book 100% on everything, but... And it's true, the Soviets weren't really taking the environment into account. That's more of a Chinese modern thing. Facing the Anthropocene by Ian Angus. Good book. This is such a funny video. So most of you have probably already seen this, but after the US withdrew from Afghanistan and the Taliban took over the government, there was all this gym equipment at the US military bases that were left behind. And the Taliban guys they're mostly from the rural regions. They had never seen gym equipment like this before. So someone took a video of them using all the US's gym stuff. Look at them on the elliptical.
Stop!
That's such a funny freaking video. Too good. Shout out to the US for at least leaving them some gym equipment, I guess. Eddie, you should search up why, despite most Afghan people and politicians, in the 90s and early 2000s wanting the exiled king to return to unify the country, he was stopped by other outside factions. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I can look that up. Doesn't he know it's disrespectful to record in the gym? How shameful. Bro, they were just taking some physique pics for their Instagram. The Talib Instagram. That's what Jack Posobiec looks like at the gym, LOL. Best thing the US left for the Afghans. You're not wrong. I will definitely clip that response to Armchair Historian and upload it as a video. And if you want to support the work that we do here at Midwestern Marks without having YouTube steal a bunch of your money, you can check us out at patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. There's a bunch of perks that come with that. You get a bunch of exclusive videos from me. You get both of Carlos's books. So, Uncle Stam is still sad about the canceled Rambo Terror University in neighboring Xinjiang. Yeah, I mean, what China did in Xinjiang was a different situation for sure, because Xinjiang was already part of the PRC and stuff. But it did have to be liberated at one point. Even after the communists won the Civil War, they still had to go into Xinjiang and liberate it from US-backed right-wing elements. I talked to a Chinese fella about that the other day. But their ability to prevent Xinjiang from being taken over by jihadists was very effective and shows the effectiveness and pragmatism of the Chinese state. And the US accused them of genocide for it, of course, but they prevented their country from being taken over. Yo, Lennon Dubois. Thank you, brother. $8 super chat. I didn't even know you could do $8. I thought it had to be like 5 or 10. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Lord knows I could use the money right now. I had my best month maybe ever on TikTok. So I'm hoping when I get paid from TikTok, I'll be able to get some wheels and make sure that I can get from point A to point B. But right now I have no car. So thank you very much. Your super chats are going long. They always go a long way, but right now they're going an even longer way. What was I talking about? I had something I wanted to look up. Bro was running backwards on the elliptical. He was. Oh, I remember what I wanted to look up. Got a couple things, I guess, to end on. So this is the end of the Rambo 3 movie. For some reason, Rambo said, this film is dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters of Afghanistan. So Rambo 3 was dedicated to literal terrorists. There's Sylvester Stallone and Osama. This is kind of crazy. And then you have this article too. Whoops. Get out of here. You have this like puff piece about Osama bin Laden himself. Anti-Soviet warrior puts his army... Oh, hold on, I gotta turn ad blocker off. Anti-Soviet warrior puts his army on the road to peace. The Saudi businessman who recruited Mujahideen now uses them for large-scale building projects. And there's a picture of him somewhere in this article. It's Osama bin Laden himself. It's a puff piece about him that was published in The Independent in 1993. So it just goes to show, the U.S. narratives about these things. They were using entertainment media like Rambo, and The Independent's actually a British outlet, but British U.S. same thing. They were using the news media like The Independent to praise these terrorists, and they were using the entertainment media like Rambo to praise these terrorists. And then just less than a decade later, they would be invading Afghanistan to allegedly fight the same terrorists after 9/11 happened. When these people who at least were blamed for 9/11, who knows what your opinions are on that, but they were being praised as freedom fighters for decades because they were fighting the Soviet Union. And then when it was convenient for the U.S. to go into Iraq and Afghanistan, all of a sudden these are the worst terrorists in the world. If you support them, you're a demon. If you don't think they're demons, then you're a demon. If you don't think we should go in and murder them all, you're evil and you hate America. It's just crazy. The empire of lies that we live in. We have to go fight these people who are heroic freedom fighters that we gave guns to. Midwestern Marks would really benefit from more editors so videos could come out quicker and more professional looking. Of course, if the channel had really good editors, people would be crying it's CIA funded. Yeah, but it'd be worth it. I know, we do a lot of editing with the ACP, like that recent video essay I did on the existing Marxist-Leninist countries that was edited by ACP editors, and we have them doing video essays round the clock, but I wouldn't want to take up ACP resources for the Midwestern Marks channel, even though the two things are connected. But if anyone in the chat wants to help edit videos, hit me up. We just got to get more subscribers and viewers. We just have to grow the channel so I have more money to pay for something like that. Reminds me of those TikTok conspiracy theorists that are like ancient people couldn't do geometry, must have been aliens. Bro, I see some wild stuff on TikTok. Wild stuff. About like the city of Atlantis or whatever. I saw one the other day. It said that people from like Mississippi and Alabama were the original Egyptians. I was like, bro, what the hell am I watching? What am I watching? It's like to distract people from real conspiracies. There's another guy who says like Joe Rogan and he says like all celebrities are like shape-shifting reptiles. So he'll take any celebrity that even looks remotely similar to another celebrity or government official and claim that they're a shape-shifting reptile and the same person. It's something else. That's the CIA has explicitly said that they use aliens for that reason. Not to say that, I don't believe that aliens could be out there or intelligent life or whatever. Probably already living in communism on another planet. But anytime like something like the Epstein files is going down, like the Trump administration has been doing this recently, they start talking about aliens. Right when the Epstein stuff dropped, there was a U.S. government official who went on Joe Rogan and started talking about aliens. And it's to get people thinking about the wrong kinds of conspiracies. Get them thinking about aliens instead of what it's proven that our corrupt, evil government is doing. Super cool. I caught a live after watching you on TikTok. Hey, thanks for being here, comrade. Appreciate it. Everyone knows that they came from inner core. That's David Icke's thing. Get your own. That is his thing. Alternate history, but it's the Soviet Union during medieval times. Yep, total psyop. What do you think about automatons from Helldivers 2? I've never played that game. My friends love that game. they play with each other online, I think. Imagine the present world with a still existing Soviet Union 50 years ahead of China. Bro, I don't even want to think about it. It makes me sad. That's like when people say, imagine if the communists in Germany were successful and instead of going Yahtzee, they went communist. Because the reason that happened in Germany was because they were being forced to pay war debts from World War One to the UK and France and others, who had to then pay debts to the United States because for the first time in world history, the U.S. refused to cancel the World War One debt. So before that, historically, if you gave a country loans during wartime, gave an ally country loans, you would then cancel those loans and not expect the other country to pay them back once the war ended. But the U.S. refused to forgive any of the World War One loans because they wanted to weaken the competing empires. So Germany was then forced to pay constant reparations to the UK and France, who then were forced to pay constant debts to the United States, and it impoverished Germany and created the conditions for Mustache Man to rise to power. But, Russia had a lot of loans too from the wars they were fighting, but when the Bolsheviks took power, they just canceled all the debts. And, there's another alternative timeline where Germany could have become a communist country and canceled their debts instead of having the Mustache Man come to power. And imagine how that would have turned out, but it doesn't do much good to speculate on such things. Yup, he continued to pay them instead of allowing the communists to come to power and cancel them. Scumbag. That's like I call Hitler a scumbag. It's like the Norm Macdonald joke. That Hitler, the more I learn about him, the more I think he's a real jerk. His economy was so inflated it was on the verge of collapse before invading Poland. Yeah, he didn't do anything to fix the problems. He was just like, we need to go to war with everyone. We're the master race. These other countries put us in debt. Let's invade them instead of canceling the debt and rebuilding our economy. It was a total bailout for the banking class. The German people should have risen up and overthrown the bankers who had put them in that horrid position. But instead, they had this lunatic class collaborationist come to power and just start spending all their money on endless wars. Call me crazy, but I'm not very fond of this Adolf fellow or his behavior. Rest in peace, Norm Macdonald. He was so funny. Ugh. UFC fights tonight. Anybody watching?
You didn't know who Hitler was?
Yeah, like many of us, I didn't. But I do now. And let me tell you something. That guy's no good. Now, I grew up like you, thinking the Nazis were a bunch of funny fellas, because I watched Hogan's Heroes every week. But it wasn't like that. Oh, I know nothing. I see nothing. A lot less funny when you figure that was the cornerstone of the Nuremberg trial's defense. Now,
You didn't know who Hitler was?
That's so good. I have some old wrenches and pliers from East Germany used for work. Pretty good quality. That's cool. Everything was better quality back then. I know I sound like a boomer, but it's true. Everything's made to break now. There's a part in Lenin's Imperialism where he predicts planned obsolescence. He says, the monopolization of industry creates the economic incentive for worse products because they'll break. And if you monopolize the market, people have to go right back to you to buy their new product. Which is crazy that he predicted that in 1917. I don't know if it was already going on back then. But he basically, by understanding theory and understanding the larger direction the economy was going towards monopoly, he predicts what is now commonplace. Um, I remember my parents got their washing machine fixed one year, and the technician was like, "Yeah, back in the day, these things would last for like 20 years. Now they break every 2 to 3 years because they know you're gonna have to buy another one." Same thing with cars, bro. That's why I need a new car now. That's why all of your super chats, which I'm so grateful for, thank you all, are going towards a new vehicle. Hopefully some of my YouTube videos will blow up and I'll be able to milk them for some ad revenue rather than just having to take all your guys' hard-earned money. I don't remember what I was doing. Should I stream a game of chess now? I don't know if I'm logged in on my computer. That'd be fun though. Older Lexus GX. I'm just gonna see whatever's on Facebook Marketplace, bro. To be honest with you. What is my chess.com account? I'm not logged in. Password is not correct. Might have to set this up for next time. That'd be fun though, to end the stream with a couple chess games. Chess streaming is big. Like every time I scroll through TikTok, I just get chess streamers. People love that game. I love that game. I'm obsessed with it. What email account do I have attached here? Is it this one? Oh, it is. I did it. Should we play a game? Alright, nobody... Here's the rule. If we're going to stream a chess game, nobody can give me tips in the chat. Okay, we don't want to cheat. So, like, even... I'm not very good. You might be amazing at chess. And I'm like, I'm only like 700 ELO. Haas hates chess. That is true. He hates chess. But if you're really good at chess, don't give me any advice, because that's cheating. Okay, let's do it. I've been wanting to try this for a while. Today's the day. Alright, we're white. Looks like. This is a 10-minute game, right? Do I have an opponent yet? Yes. Oh, never mind. We're black. Alright, let's go. Every communist has to be good at chess. You know who liked chess? I'm going to have to tell this to Haas next time. Lenin liked chess. Lenin was a beast at chess. Alright, this is where I gotta like stop and really think. Hold up. Okay, so he's attacking me here. I'm just gonna go here, right? I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. Okay. Also, most chess streamers play music in the background, so I gotta get that going at some point. All right. Yeah, it's not a big deal. Hell yeah. Texas Hold'em poker. Lenin like Texas Hold'em? That's interesting. All right, what do we want to do here? Just got to develop all our pieces first. Now, what do we want to do? I think if I come back here, then I can give my rook an open line. If I come here, I can control the center better. Let's go with this. Now, do I take with pawn or with this? Let's go here. Alright, that's not a big deal. But where do I want to go now? This guy can go here, 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 or here, I mean. Let's go here. Haas said Lennon only played chess because there was nothing else to do. Bro, that's cap. Haas has told me before that the best video games, or like the most addicting ones, are like the most simplistic games. That's true. And chess is complicated, but it's also like more simple than other games, like modern video games. So I think that's the reason it's so popular and timeless. Like, I have modern video games. I have a PS5, but like nothing beats that. He just gave me his rook. What was he thinking there? All right, let's go here. Hey there, Mr. Jumbo. Out there in the African sun. I think it's time to castle. I still play it on my Game Boy, LOL chess. Oh, Tetris. Yeah, bro, like Tetris. Tetris, the great Soviet game. Oops, where'd he go? Right here. What next? We do got to get this guy out at some point. But we could also move this guy here and push our advantage in the center. Let's try to get this guy out first. Kyle Gordon, yeah, I think that guy's hilarious, to be honest with you. All right, we got a 2 material lead. This is big. This is big. Could go here. What does that set up? Nothing. Ooh, we could also go. I wouldn't say nothing. Let's do it. Because now we can push on this side and try to get our rook out. Right? Well, hold on. We could have done that anyways. I'm an idiot. What do we got here? See, some people never take their time, and you do got to watch your time, but like taking your time is better than not. Let's just do this. He's probably going to move forward here. Nope, he's going to go here, which I will respond by going... Should I take? That does open up a free... All right, let's do it. Take. Now I have this. He can go here, I take... Oh, gotta watch out for this. Now we can get our queen into the game. go. Uh-oh, not good. Not good. Uh-oh, we can still go here, but no, then we'd be alright. Then we take with our rook. Alright, I'm stupid. Alright. We scared him away, guys. Now what? Now we go here. Now this is open too. But now what do we do? I have trouble deciding always where to put the pawns. You know, I just, I never know when to move a pawn. Go here. Or I can go here. How about this? Now he can go here and attack my rook. What can I do in response here? What if I move this guy back? I'm sorry if you're good at chess. This is probably so infuriating to watch. Yeah, that's what I thought he was going to do. But now I just go here. I think we're all right. What was that move? Why would he do that? I don't understand the purpose of what he just did. She, the woman. 787 yellow. Very relaxing. You guys like it? Yeah, we gotta start ending the streams with some chess gameplay. What am I at? I'm way down on time, unfortunately. But we'll be alright. Let's see. Now I wanna go here. Gotta break open the center. I might lose out on this, but that's okay. Maybe I should have taken this. Nope, he's gonna go there. Let's threaten his queen because we're winning, right? Best option. We're barely winning now, though. How am I not winning by more material? Didn't I get a free knight earlier? Did he take something that I missed? Maybe he took my bishop and I missed it. That's right. I don't know what he's trying to do with that move. Let's just take this. This guy's not in a great spot, honestly. What can I do here? I could threaten his queen again. Oh, I can go here. No, that's stupid. I've seen some Soviet-era chessboards on eBay, mostly from Ukrainian and Latvian sellers because Russia is banned by eBay. Yeah, it's very big. Chess is huge. I mean, obviously the Soviets dominated chess for years, but they promoted it at every level. because they saw it as a game that like everyone could play regardless of economic standing. So it's very popular in all those countries. Very, very popular. It's unfortunate the Russian boards are banned. Should we take? That does help him centralize his queen, but all right, let's not let him do that. Surely helps to learn Kasparov uber cringe. He is uber cringe. Oh, I gotta pay attention. I'm running out of time. He just castled. What the hell? Pretty late in the game for that, brother. Do I care if he takes this? I'd rather he... Oh, no, it doesn't really matter. Let's do this. Now I can go... No, I gave up my queen. We suck. Oh no, we suck again. Gosh, I was winning the whole game and I blunder my queen at the end. I was trying to go too fast. See, I was giving that big talk about like how taking your time is important, but if you take your time too much, you run out of time and you blunder your queen. Maybe we could still pull this off. Uh-oh. No, we lose. All he has to do is go here. No, she missed it. Missed it again. Literally all you gotta do is go here. Yep. Dang it, not a good start for our first game on stream, guys. I don't really play chess. It's interesting, though. Yeah, it's super fun. There's a big learning curve. It takes a while to get into it, but... Normally, I would look at my game review, but let's do one more game before we wrap. One more. Alright, we're white. I'm much better with white. You know what's crazy is on chess.com, Israeli flags are allowed, but Russian and Belarusian flags are banned. It's sad. After the World Cup, I played somebody from Egypt, or I think it was Egypt, and they just said, USA are cheaters. They rig World Cup, and then blocked me. And I was like, if he didn't block me, he would have learned that I actually agree with him. Ooh, that's a good start for me. Give me that. Give me that. I wonder what he's trying to do here. It's the same with the Olympics, yeah. At the well, Russia's allowed to compete in 28 now. But at the European Games recently, a Russian won the gold medal and they wouldn't let her wear her country's flag or whatever and play the Russian anthem. Should we take as our winning? No, let's go here. No, poop. I was hoping he wouldn't see that. Don't really want to give this up yet. Although I could trade because I'm up 5. It's always good to trade when you're winning. Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah, she won on the vault. Russophobia, yeah. You're allowed to be racist towards Russians. That's it. Can't be racist towards anyone except Russians. And in Europe, it's bad. No offense if you're European, but so many of them are like, we are the civilized people. We are so much higher than these dirty Russians. But then they're like totally backwards in their thinking. Could push here. Trying to get our free lane here. Should probably get this guy out though. Does this guy have anywhere to go? No. But what if I go here? No, I just do the old switcheroo. Alright, time to sacrifice this guy. He's outlived his usefulness. You did good, Bishop. You got me a rook. Think it maybe go here. Try to get my queen in the game. What the heck? I want to get my queen in the game. Come on, buddy. Actually, we could go here. What the hell? I don't know about that move. Do I take or do I go here? No, I gotta fork. No, do I want to go? I want to go. I'm not blundering, am I? No, I want to go here. If I was him, I would move this knight. Well, then I can take, though. Oh, what did he just take? Oh, he took my bishop. Oh, I could have had his queen. Dang it, I'm going too fast. I just warned about not going too fast. Now look at me. Dang it. No, I just blundered my queen. What am I doing? Oh, now you guys understand why I hate chess. But I love it. I was dominating this game. Bro. I gave up a huge lead. I don't know what I was thinking there. You guys are making me nervous. What does he have here? So let's do this. How did he checkmate me? Bro, I swear I won like 10 games before I started streaming. Dang. See, this is why I was afraid to stream chess. I gotta get better. I gotta stop blundering my damn queen. I gotta have my boy James come on. You may need to switch over to a 15 or 30-minute game, Eddie. You're right, I do. When I have time to think, that's why the games I lose, I usually like am winning, and then I lose at the end once I start to run out of time. 30-minute games, like classical chess games, I think I could do better. All right, y'all. That's all from me today. Thanks for playing chess with me and watching the stream. Eddie, I sent you a friend request on there. I'll add you, brother. We can play. Hopefully you're good enough to teach me a few things. I've had a lot of friend requests on chess.com lately because I've been talking about it more on TikTok and stuff. But thank you to all the super chatters. Thank you to all the homies who hung out today. I'll upload that video about Armchair Historian right away. Make sure to give it a like. Patreon.com/MidwesternMarks, acp.us. We'll see you on the next stream.